Sudan is experiencing the world's greatest humanitarian crisis. Not the Middle East, not Ukraine, Sudan. And almost no one is talking about it. More than 12 million people have been forced to leave their homes. More than 25 million, half of the country's population, are in a situation of severe food insecurity. And in some regions, hunger is no longer a threat. It is a reality. Subscribe to the channel. This type of analysis comes out every week. Leave a like before continuing. To understand what is happening in Sudan, you need to understand how a country that seemed to be heading toward democracy collapsed in less than 48 hours. In April 2023, two generals who until then shared power entered into open conflict. On one side, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, commander of the Sudanese Armed Forces, the state's official army. On the other, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, commander of the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary militia originally created to fight rebellions in the country's interior. The two were allies. Together, they staged a coup in 2021, overthrowing the civilian transitional government that had taken power after the fall of dictator Omar al-Bashir in 2019. But the alliance was fragile. The dispute for control of the country, the money, and Sudan's mineral wealth was only a matter of time. And when it exploded in the middle of Khartoum, the capital, with tanks in the streets, fighter jets flying over residential neighborhoods, and clashes inside hospitals. Within days, the conflict spread to other regions. Within weeks, the country was in full civil war. But who are these actors, and why does this dispute matter beyond Sudanese borders? The Sudanese Armed Forces are the state's formal army, structured with military aviation, artillery, and support from countries like Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. At different times during the conflict, they control the north and east of the country, including Port Sudan, which became the new administrative capital after the fall of Khartoum. The Rapid Support Forces are different. They were born from the Janjaweed group, the militias that caused mass casualties among civilian populations in Darfur when al-Bashir himself used them as an instrument of repression. Hemeti transformed this group into a paramilitary force of over 100,000 fighters, with funding coming from smuggled gold, support from the United Arab Emirates, and connections to Russia through the Wagner Group. They control much of the west and center of the country, including most of Khartoum. It is a conflict between two powers that were born from the same dictatorship, that united to prevent democracy, and that are now destroying each other while the civilian population pays the price. Darfur is being devastated again. Reports of deliberate attacks against ethnic groups, systematic violence used as an instrument of war, entire communities forced to abandon their origins. The UN and several international organizations have described what is happening in Darfur as systematic and widespread violence aimed at targeting entire communities, one of the most serious situations documented on the African continent in recent decades. Sudan's healthcare system has collapsed. More than 70% of hospitals in conflict zones are closed or operating minimally. Diseases that had been controlled, cholera, measles, malaria, have returned with force in displacement areas. Children are the most vulnerable. UNICEF estimates that more than 3 million children are at risk of severe acute malnutrition, schools closed, families separated, an entire generation growing up in the middle of the war. And the world is looking the other way. International coverage of Sudan is a fraction of what other conflicts receive. Without attention, without pressure, armed groups act with impunity. Peace negotiations have produced agreements that were never respected. Every ceasefire lasted days or hours before being broken. Why does Sudan matter beyond its borders? Because it is the third largest country in Africa, because it borders 7 countries, Egypt, Libya, Chad, Ethiopia, and Eritrea among them, all in situations of their own instability. Because Sudan's collapse creates waves that spread across the entire region in the form of refugees, arms trafficking, and power vacuums that extremist groups fill. And because Sudan has gold, a lot of gold, it is one of the largest producers on the African continent, and that gold is financing the conflict, smuggled by the RSF through networks that reach the United Arab Emirates and beyond. In the end, Sudan is not just a humanitarian tragedy. It is an example of how the world allows devastating crises to deepen when there are no cameras, when there are no strategic resources at stake for the great powers, and when the victims do not have enough of a voice to be heard.